All right, welcome to today's video. In today's video, we are kicking off what I am going to call the Fundamentals series. I've gotten a lot of really great feedback about my POV videos and the BTS component of that and how people see how I take my street photography. So I thought, why don't we just break down then what it is exactly I'm looking for instead of really showing it. We'll still do the POVs, but this is going to be a little bit more of a tailored and comprehensive look at photography fundamentals that we can all hopefully incorporate into not only our street photography, but in other genres of photography as well. So I'm excited for this one. A big thing with photography lately is, you know, those videos where it's like what I see versus what my camera sees, and yeah, the BTS portion of that. And I want to go in one layer deeper with this series and just go like, well, why are we seeing what we see when we take a picture? So we're going to be covering things like the fundamental aspects of composition, what it is exactly you need to think of in your compositions before you take the photo to take a photo that catches somebody's eye, that tells a story, and that really engages people instead of just taking a shot at eye level and having something that documents the moment. I think when we really grow as a photographer is when we can bridge the gap between taking a photo that's purely documentary and then taking another photo that really tells a story and compels people to stare at it for a long time and figure out what's in it. Specifically for me, photos of visual hierarchy are something that I literally can't get enough of, or that incorporate a big sense of balance. And the interesting part is that Toronto is actually an asymmetrical city, and I would argue that balance is a hard concept to find photographically in Toronto. So we are going to be covering a ton of these different concepts and breaking down exactly what it is I'm talking about. Every other week, I'll be releasing a fundamentals video that will explain what the concept is, and then a follow-up video where we actually head out. It's going to be either a POV or a little bit different style of video than I think we're used to seeing, where we focus specifically on capturing that concept in our photography. So what do I mean by fundamentals? Well, it can be anything from learning rules of composition like the rule of thirds or the golden ratio, or different photographic elements that we can incorporate such as leading lines, tools of symmetry and balance, that kind of thing. Behind every great photo are these key principles and concepts that often go unnoticed. Nobody really realizes, you know, the amount of pre-planning, the amount of studying you need to do to understand what it is you're looking at. A street road looks like a street road to most people, but to somebody that knows leading lines or asymmetry or symmetry, they're looking at that road very differently. Maybe there's converging lines at the very end of it, and that's what we're trying to capture. And so this series is going to be about learning what to look for when we're actually out taking our street photography. Really, as photographers, I think it's our job to know the principles and fundamentals as best as possible, especially because if we want to take really impactful images, these are the things that we need to know in order to do that. So to kick things off, I'm going to say that there are two types of fundamentals in photography, one being photographic elements and the other being photographic principles. Elements are what comprise the photo. A collection of elements will eventually make the image. So this can be anything such as shapes, colors, textures, lines, a whole bunch of different elements that essentially make up our everyday that then we as a photographer connect into making a single image. Process then of making these elements photogenic are what we call photographic principles. So that's what takes our understanding of the elements, puts them all together, and makes a photo that's actually appealing to somebody. So I'll put up a few photos to show you exactly what I'm talking about and just give you a little quick introduction into what elements are in my photography, what principles I've utilized in some of these photos, and examples of photographic principles will be things like balance, proportion, contrast. Again, the idea of making sense of the elements that we're actually looking at. And that'll just give you a little introduction into this series and what we're going to do. So the first photo we'll talk about is this one of Old City Hall. This is a classic composition. It might be my favorite composition actually in Toronto that exists in the city as far as a landscape photo goes, and definitely as like an urban photography composition. I wouldn't classify this as street photography because it's not really a candid moment of a person, but I did take this in like a street photography fashion, just like walking around and grabbing a quick photo. So I think that there are a few elements in this photo that I think we could talk about. The first one, however, being lines. Obviously there are vertical lines on both the right and the left of the photo that lead down to the image and help us direct it to the street. And then with the street, we have a leading line pointing right to the clock tower to help guide our eyes. As far as a principle in this photo, I would say contrast is featuring quite heavily. I take an interesting approach with my photos where I have deep blacks in my shadows, but I actually fade them off, and that's definitely featuring heavily here, and that's just making sense of the image from a principle's perspective. The next image that I will pull up is this lookup shot of the financial district in Toronto. On the left side, you have the roof of one of the buildings, and on the right side, you have two of the skyscrapers. Again, lines feature quite prominently in this photo. Contrast exists as well. Obviously at the bottom, it's darker than at the top with the way that the lighting changes. You could argue that there is some principles involving rhythm and patterns with how many windows actually exist on the buildings themselves. Finally, another element might also be shape. Obviously, these buildings and the roof themselves are quite rectangular and squared off, hard edges, and that features quite prominently in this photo. And I edited it with a lot of sharpness and texture to reflect that as well. The final photo we'll look at is a shot that was in a video a couple weeks ago that has this umbrella with the snow on top of the umbrella. So a principle on this shot is for sure depth. I just picked this one to show the discrepancy in what different types of depth that you can get. Obviously with the umbrella in focus and everything else out of focus, that was a big feature of this photo to get that effect of depth of field. I usually shoot my street photography at f2.8 because depth is something that I'm often looking for in my street photos. Another example then in this photo of an element is actually texture. I purposefully sharpened the snow on top of the umbrella to really have a crisper, brittly feel as if the snow was icy. And that I find on top of the umbrella gives it that sort of more roughness that you would see in a photo. Other examples of texture though that really go a long way are drone shots of landscapes that have really showcasing a landscape, or maybe it's a shot of a brick wall and you're noticing all the little granules in the brick. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna cap the video off here. Just a quick introduction into what you can expect to see on the channel. I really appreciate you all for watching. I'm excited about this series because not only can we do these little sit down chats and break down photographic compositions, but we also get the chance to shoot a POV afterwards. So keep your eyes out for that. These videos are going to be released on a rolling basis, and let me know what you think, obviously, in the comments below, or feel free to DM me on Instagram. With that, I'm just going to end it off here and say thanks for watching and hope to see you all in the next one.